This is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 7th of January, 2024. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks.
I'm Michael Wade.
And you are a little low on volume. I'm not sure what's going on. We'll probably have to modify some stuff. It's been a couple of weeks since we've been here. We had the holiday season, so I hope you had a great holiday season, Michael.
Absolutely. How about you?
It was very good. I got to take some time off and recharge some batteries for all the good that did. And I spent the last week back working again. So, once you get used to not working, getting used to working again is a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, that is absolutely true.
However, we are back, and we're back with the podcast. I'm very happy that you are here today, in fact, because we got to talk about some legal stuff that went on while you were gone. And to do so, I want to switch our screen share here. And by the way, your screen is way bigger, and I think it's because of me. And so let me see if I can change your screen around here to make us more or less equal size. I think I was right in front of your face there, so that's probably not the best place for me to be.
I was hiding.
So I'm still a little in your face. I'm not sure what's going on here, but we gotta fix this. Well, here's the problem. It's wrong on Zoom, and then it's wrong on camera. So it's so hard to try to get everything fixed up the right way. I think that gets us close, though, doesn't it? That's
yeah.
We're more or less the same size now. Sorry about that. It's been a couple of weeks. Technical issues are intervening. We apologize for them. Let's talk about Donald Trump. Let's talk about the state of Colorado and the Colorado Supreme Court by a vote of 4-3, saying that Donald Trump is a damned insurrectionist and therefore he cannot appear on the ballot. As a sign of their confidence in this ruling, they immediately stayed it until such time as the Supreme Court might take it up, and were they to do so, it is stayed indefinitely until the Supreme Court rules. Well, the Supreme Court has, in fact, taken up a writ of certiorari on this case, and so therefore Donald Trump's name, for now, will go on the ballot. And what I wanted to do was take a minute and go over some of the issues that were raised on appeal. Trump's lawyers raised some interesting issues. They raised several of them. I thought we might want to go through and talk about it. So we'll start right here with the possible issues on appeal. By the way, the Supreme Court has already accepted this. They will hear these oral arguments on the 8th of February, I believe. All amicus briefs have to be filed by the 5th of February. I've never filed an amicus brief before. I'm kind of interested in filing one. That notwithstanding, I wanted to go through what they were talking about. First of all, we're talking about Section 113 of Colorado's election law, which does not apply, according to Trump's lawyers, to presidential candidates, that in fact they have no jurisdiction, and the Colorado state courts have in fact no jurisdiction to litigate a constitutional claim over Section 113 of the Colorado Election Code. The trial court, in fact, said they did have no such jurisdiction. The Colorado Supreme Court, a majority at least, said that they, in fact, did. This is kind of a really in-the-weeds legal issue, but I assume that you, like me, don't see how the Colorado Election Code is a vehicle for any sort of constitutional litigation.
Right. It can't be, unless it's against the Constitution. It's not possible to circumscribe who can be president. The only qualifications that are required are those that are mentioned in Article 1. So, in Article 2. So there's no there's nothing else. Certainly not a state by itself can go ahead and add extra um, limitations, obstacles to a person being on the ballot. Um, what's even more appalling to me is that this is for the primary race, which is not run by Colorado. I guess the voting part is, but it's a race by Republicans for Republicans. So I don't understand why they have any jurisdiction here at all, to be quite honest. But that being beside the point, um, no, they really don't have jurisdiction. If they did, then Congress would have made it so when it drafted regulations per Section 5 of Amendment 14 to enforce the 14th Amendment.
Which they did.
They didn't mention anything, which they did.
The Enforcement Act of 1870 actually, well, we have to go back. There was a case that Samuel Chase, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, wrote an opinion on by himself in a case, a Virginia state case called Henry Griffin, where he basically said, in direct contravention to what he had said in a different opinion, but we'll elide past that, that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which bars anyone who commits insurrection from serving in any federal office. Although, does that apply to the president? I'm not entirely sure. There's a whole freaking thing we can get into there, but which I think would bore most people, because is the president actually one of the officer of the United States? A plain reading of the Constitution indicates that he is not, but in any event, not only is this a primary, so it is an election Republicans of Republicans for Republicans, and whoever wins this primary does not win an office.
Right.
There's no office at stake here. This is a primary election. And I think one can argue that even if one were to be an insurrectionist, and we'll figure out what an insurrectionist is, I guess, a little later, but even if one were to be an insurrectionist, couldn't they still be elected? Because Congress has the power to remove a disability from an insurrectionist, and there is a ban on the insurrectionists serving in office. But I mean, technically, one could be elected as president who was an insurrectionist, and Congress could, prior to January 20th of the following year, remove the disability to allow him to serve in the office.
Yeah, which is what happened with the few cases that came from the 1870 Act. And then the whole thing was revamped in 1965, I think.
48 first, and then there were some other changes. Ultimately, the whole thing about insurrection is now, or it has been since 1948. Its most recent incarnation is in 18 U.S.C. 2383. Which was moved from section 1828 or something in 1948. It's also been slightly amended since then. So basically we had the Enforcement Act of 1870, which then became the federal crime of insurrection under Title 18 somewhere in section 1800-ish. And then in 48, it got moved to section 2383. But there is a line of dissent from the Enforcement Act of 1870, which only exists, by the way, because Henry Griffin, Salmon P. Chase, said, no, Congress needs to come up with what insurrection is. There has to be due process. You can't just say, ooh, he's an insurrectionist. I'm not entirely sure that Justice Chase was right in Henry Griffin, because Congress had, in 1862, already specified who was an insurrectionist. And they listed all of the people who had served in many different offices in the Confederacy, and they listed if you served in office X, like you were a state representative in the Confederate Congress, or a state senator, or the president or vice president, or if you were a military officer or a non-commissioned officer, you were automatically considered an insurrectionist. So at least in terms of those people who had served in the Civil War, Congress had, in 1862, already said who the insurrectionists were. They'd already defined that. And after Henry Griffin, they came out with the Enforcement Act of 1870 and said, okay, so if you are convicted of insurrection, which is a federal crime, you can't serve in the office. And we can now see that descent to today. So this is a weird one because it is about a primary, and I'm not sure how the code enforces that. But even if we were to go further than that, even if Trump were on the ballot, first of all, I don't know how Colorado takes him off the ballot, but I don't know why he can't be on a ballot, even if he's ineligible for the office. If he gets elected to that office, Congress could still remove the disability.
Right. And ultimately, it's Congress that certifies the election. So,
right, because especially
Colorado doesn't have a role to play.
Yeah, so weird. Question B. The district court said they didn't have the jurisdiction to determine what an insurrection was and who engaged in it, which I think is probably a valid argument. So, was the district court or the appeals court right? Because the appeals court said, oh, yeah, we have the jurisdiction. Because, again, they made Section 3 of the 14th Amendment magically self-enforcing. Which it's
not.
Again, but let's assume, arguendo, in the absence of any congressional action, that Section 3 then becomes somehow self-enforcing. And only Congress could make it not self-enforcing by implementing Section 5. And Section 5 says that Congress will enforce this through the appropriate legislation. And once Congress speaks and enforces it, it's no longer self-enforcing. Congress has, at that point, determined how that amendment is going to be enforced. So you might have the argument that it was somehow self-enforcing, not sure how, but somehow it's self-enforcing had Congress not acted.
Yeah, you could make that argument. But that would still leave the due process out, because Trump was neither charged nor convicted of insurrection, of any violation of 2283, or whatever it is, 2383. I can't remember. But he's not been charged with nor convicted of anything of that sort. He is owed due process. If they're going to make that determination, then he should be a party to the suit, and he should have the ability to challenge any evidence that they bring against him to prove that he was an insurrection.
Because now we're back to Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. Because due process. So sure, there is Section 3. You know what I probably should have done before we went through all of this? And now that we're here, let's go with 14th Amendment. I'm pretty sure that I can find it on the internet pretty quick. So the 14th. There you go. So there we go. The 14th Amendment. There was a much easier version of this. Let's go to the. That's the over. I think I had a better.
You can do it by sections over there. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't really want to do it by section, but okay. There was a. I'm sure that I have it here somewhere, which has the entire constitutional amendment written in text. There you go. So we have Section 3. Now, notice who it doesn't say can't serve. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of the president or vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States, under any states who previously have been taken oath, blah, blah, he's an insurrectionist. You know what this doesn't say anything about? The president and vice president.
Hmm. That might be because there are special cases for presidents and vice presidents. That would be in the section one or article one under legislative powers.
Yeah, so then we get to section 3. That is supposed to be self enforcing, but is it against the president? Doesn't say so. And by the way, there are several other cases in the Constitution. I have to go back and find them. When it talks about an officer of the United States, it gives the president the power to appoint officers of the United States.
Right.
Since a president can't appoint themselves, then the presidency must not be one of the officers of the United States, because the language of the Constitution would simply make no sense in that case.
Right.
So that aside, and then of course, this is the key one right here. Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. Congress has the power to enforce. So clearly something must be enforced here. Is section 1 self-executing?
Obviously not.
Well, based on the state of American law. But even if not, even if it were, once Congress does this, Congress now determines how this works. And
right.
Only Congress gets to make that determination. So I wanted to be sure that we had that clear. The district court says they didn't have any authority to investigate or to remove a presidential candidate under Section 3. The Supreme Court of Colorado said that they did. I think we've largely talked about that. We can move on. Congress has not authorized states' courts to enforce Section 3. And, of course, Section 5, as we just looked at, specifically grants Congress the authority to implement the provisions. So, again, the question at issue here: may a state district court adjudicate Section 3 disqualification absent a congressional authorizing statute? I'm asking you.
I would say no. No, the answer is no.
Yeah.
I mean, the as we've said many times, the state really does not have any jurisdiction here. And as you said before, where Congress has spoken, well, that's it. And they haven't said that states can take up the adjudication of an alleged violation of Section 3.
In fact, by creating the crime of insurrection, Congress basically did exactly the opposite of that.
Yes, exactly.
Does presidential disqualification present a political question, non-justiciable in a state court, as multiple state courts have held? Well, I think we already know the answer there.
Yeah.
For the first time ever, the district court found that the phrase engaged in, as used in Section 3, includes incited. Now, this is a really interesting thing because Trump never actually did anything on January 6th. He showed up on the Mall. He gave a speech. He said, now go to Congress and peacefully, but how did he say? Your
voices be heard.
He said, but peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
Right.
Well, I'll give everybody a pass on the patriotic part. The peaceful part, I think, is still a little in question there. But the fact is, that's what he said. Now, what we are told by the Supreme Court is that these are all code words. These were all dog whistles.
Right.
And all the dogs heard the whistles. And so,
which is a conclusion of fact not presented at trial. And I don't know why they're sua sponte deciding, hey, you know what? Let's look at all the evidence we can find.
Yes.
Oh, look, TikTok. New York Times.
Well, when you say this evidence was not presented in trial, one that presupposes the existence of a trial.
Yeah, that's true.
Which did not occur at any time. So now we are just determining Well, this is the thing. We're now determining judicially the content of Donald Trump's inner life based
Right.
on, no adversarial presentation in a trial. The district court ruled President Trump's political speech incited violence, even though the words he used never advocated violence. Instead, the district court found that President Trump's supposed intent and the effect of his words upon certain listeners sufficed to render his speech unprotected under the First Amendment. Did this district court err in its application of First Amendment standards to President Trump's speech? Yeah.
Absolutely, it did.
Yeah.
Those were not fighting words. There's no Brandenburg exception. So, I mean, they absolutely misapplied the First Amendment.
The district court relied upon the president's alleged delay in deploying the National Guard as a basis to determine that President Trump recklessly endangered people and, again, engaged in insurrection. The Supreme Court has made it repeatedly clear that courts may not second-guess a president's discretionary decision-making in this area. Did the district court's decision improperly invade the province of the federal executive branch? Yes.
Well, sure, but it's even worse than that. Just evidentiary, from an evidentiary standpoint, what evidence was there that provided any of this? That he delayed in deploying the National Guard.
There was an allegation.
Right. There was no evidence. Matter of fact, there's evidence to the opposite, that he actually offered the National Guard several times. But Nancy Pelosi put the kibosh on that. So, again, they're just, this is a trial, a left-wing trial with left-wing sources, and nobody else gets to say anything.
Yeah, well, I think we'll actually get into that when we talk about the burden of proof and what constitutes proof. The Supreme Court made a specific definition of insurrection. This definition, however, is new and without precedent. Did the district court adopt the proper definition of insurrection? The Colorado Supreme Court said they did. The United States Supreme Court may say something different. And this is what we have talked about since the week after January 6th.
Mm-hmm.
The second that January 6th started, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi were all out there using the word insurrection. This was an insurrection. I maintain, as have you, and still maintain, this was not an insurrection. This was a riot. It got out of hand. And why do we care? Because there were many other riots in 2020 that had gotten out of hand prior to the January 6, 2021. So it's a weird kind of insurrection when people show up in Washington, D.C. with nothing more dangerous to wield than signs.
Yeah. And telecast, their moves the entire time. I mean, they said, yeah, we're going to go up there to Congress and make our voices heard. So, I mean, there was no surprise. I mean, this was all prepared for. Well, it should have been prepared for. And again, they're saying that the proper standard here is preponderance of the evidence.
Right. That
Well, it
gets us
can't be
into
right.
Section J.
Which doesn't make any sense because it's a criminal statute. And the other thing is they came up with their own definition, I guess, pulled from the dictionary. And there's already a definition in the
in the 14th Amendment.
Right. And it's also in the statute. So I don't know where they're going with this.
Well, let's talk about the statute since we talked about it. 18 USC 2383. This is the definition of rebellion or insurrection. Whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid or comfort thereto, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years, or both, and shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States.
Now, we'll note that this uh, particular provision is overly broad. Um, it doesn't actually line up that well with the actual 14th Amendment. It's not whoever. It's whoever having given the oath of office. um, so that it's not just whoever. It's not just Joe Blow.
Yeah, again, we'd have to go back to the 14th Amendment, which says any person who, having previously taken an oath to support the Constitution of the United States. So I think we've got a criminal statute problem right here.
Yeah, that's a little broad.
Yeah, so
and
not well
it's
written.
also without authority to go broader because it's the same reason there's no general murder statute under federal law. You have to be on either it has to be a federal personnel who is murdered. It could be if it was by a personal or by a federal personnel, but it has to be at least one of those two things, or it has to be on federal property. It's the only way that you can have a murder statute because the Congress doesn't have general police powers like states do.
Right. States have murder statutes. Congress has very specific murder statutes under very specific circumstances.
Right. So that's why that whoever, it's like, wait a minute, you can't just shovel it all under there.
Okay, and then here we go. Even before the January 6th committee began its work, every committee member previously determined public announcements and an impeachment vote the supposedly obvious fact that President Trump incited an insurrection. However, he was not convicted of that by the Senate.
That's right.
So
I don't know what this every member.
Well,
every member of the committee,
every member of the January 6th committee. So all of the Democrats who were on the January 6th committee, Kinzinger and Cheney, had both said, yeah, he's an insurrectionist, which, by the way, is how they got on that committee in the first place, because they were already on board. So there was, as the indication here is, the committee contained no members who disagreed, allowed no minority staff, and hired a television producer to package the committee's conclusions for maximum political impact. Well, I don't think we care whether they hired a television producer. I'm not sure that there's a constitutional issue that comes in here. However, no members who disagreed, no minority staff, therefore no adversarial proceeding. How can we trust this as a matter of what we would consider due process?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not due process. It's incomplete process.
Yeah, we basically had a bunch of people who made a pre-committee determination what had happened. And then amazingly, the committee came out with a result that supported their conclusion that had been stated publicly prior to it happening. So how can that possibly be an insurrection? And those are the things that they asked for. So we have A through K as their constitutional issues, which apparently was good enough to get the Supreme Court to say, yeah, that seems something that we need to hear. So we talked about a couple of other things that were not mentioned here that I think are relevant, which is A, Congress has acted, that B, we actually have a crime called insurrection, which would have to be prosecuted. The whole idea that the January 6th committee, in the structure in which it created, and we've talked about that while the committee was running, that it's not really a legitimate committee.
Right.
Because it was created in opposition to actual House rules. They can't just go, we can't allow basically a kangaroo court, even if it is whooped up in Congress, to determine what the law is, to have their own trial and be the the judges, juries, and executioners of whatever accusation they want to make against any American. We can't allow that.
That's correct. Yeah, no star chambers, thank you.
So we have Section 18 U.S.C. 2383. We know what that is. Trump has never been charged with it. By the way, guess who else has never been charged with it?
Anybody.
Anyone. Ever. It is a law that exists and for which not a single individual, certainly not since 1948, has ever been charged.
Almost like it's a difficult thing to do.
Almost as if you would have to run around in the hills with a rifle and raise an army. And and here's the other thing.
Make an army installation, maybe.
Yeah, and here's exactly, perhaps open fire on a U.S. Army fort, perhaps with artillery. I mean, there are certainly ways one could do it that would be indefinable, but telling people during a public protest to go to Congress, we're making a lot of reaches there.
Yeah.
And
there's a great deal of interpretation going on, and it's not putting things in a light that would best it would be best viewed for be the best view for the defendant. So it's taking the most strained and contentious views and making those now facts.
Right. Well, here's the other thing. If the Department of Justice had said, okay, these people did something awful. They tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power by taking over Congress in an act of insurrection. Okay, make that argument. But you have to make that argument in federal court. I mean,
right.
Somebody has to be tried for that. What we have is an insurrection where literally not a single person has been charged with insurrection. Even the people who, and look, there. I know people on the right love to show the videos of Capitol Police officers letting people in, and that's great. But I've also seen videos of the Capitol Police officers being mobbed by people and having chairs thrown at them. And
both did happen.
Both things happened. And look, it could just be that the Capitol Police thought there's not enough of us to stop this, so let's let them in, and we'll just guide them through, and they can walk through Congress. On any other normal day, people walk through Congress anyway. It's open to the public, for goodness sakes. Or at least most of it is. Certainly the House and Senate office buildings aren't, but the Capitol itself is generally open to the public, and you can wander through. I know, I've done it.
They even gave the Viking King a guided tour.
Yeah, I've even been in both the House and Senate chambers. So you can go in there. So maybe the cops did that, but there were people who, there were some cops that got assaulted. Somebody got pepper sprayed, I think. Then there's the guy that said he got hit by a fire extinguisher, but nobody can ever see any evidence that actually occurred. So all kinds of things happened. There was some chaos. Let's just say mistakes were made on both sides. And that notwithstanding, the Department of Justice never, for any of those people who actually did do bad things, and look, there were people there who did bad things. And you can say, well, these were all, Fed plants, or these were all Antifa people. Doesn't matter. None of them ever got charged with insurrection. No one did.
Yeah, so it's obviously a difficult statute to apply, and it takes some sort of extraordinary actions, provable actions, to be indicted, much less to be convicted under that statute. So it's more than a little wrong for the Colorado Supreme Court to just take it upon itself to make these decisions.
Exactly. First of all, the idea that they could do that is bad, but let's take bad a step further and let's go to Maine. I mean, at least in Colorado, there was a court case. There were
Right.
there were at least the trappings of judicial activity. Then you go to Maine, and the Secretary of State says, Trump on the ballot? Fuck him. He's an insurrectionist. Well, hold
Yeah.
on. Hold on. Even if I were willing to sign on to the idea that a state court might have some convoluted authority to do that, a single elected official can now just say, yeah, you're an insurrectionist, you're disqualified for the ballot. And by the way,
Yeah. Her.
and by the way, the Constitution doesn't disqualify anyone from being on the ballot. It qualifies people from serving in, it disqualifies people from serving in the office. 14th Amendment
Right.
doesn't sing about elections.
That's right. Um, what her reasoning was, so she said, is that she held hearings and viewed evidence, including from those who say it wasn't insurrection, and then arrived at the determination that of the facts, you know, pulled together, that they showed that Trump committed insurrection. Now, again, because this is a criminal statute, it's supposed to be by beyond a reasonable doubt. When they're using preponderance of the evidence, which is, just one peppercorn more, and then you've got the preponderance of the evidence.
Well, the argument, I mean, if you want to just cut it down in both cases, judicial trappings aside, in both cases, it boiled down to, well, Trump's opponents came up with enough evidence to convince me. I'm done. I'm all in.
Right. And then there's all this other stuff I know about. I'm just going to take notice of, and well, I don't see how you can argue otherwise. So I'm not going to let anybody do that.
Yeah, and you know why you can't see how anybody can argue otherwise? Because no one's ever done it.
Right.
Because there hasn't been an adversarial proceeding.
Right.
The evidence that Congress heard in the January 6th committee was the evidence they wanted to hear.
That's right. And even the issue itself, whether that you've been kind of, buzzing around this idea, that the idea that somehow the remedy is to remove him from the ballot, doesn't make any sense, because it's a federal crime. A ballot is a federal ballot, except in the primary, where it's neither. So, I mean, they had to work really hard to find a way that they could actually have something to say here.
Yeah, well, they managed to do it. But what I found interesting in the Colorado case was that out of the 7 Supreme Court justices in Colorado, 3 of them dissented.
Mm-hmm.
All 3 of their dissents are on different grounds.
Yes.
none of them really have a lot of how would I put it, consanguinity with each other. They themselves 3 arguments for not making that decision, none of which were related.
Right. There was one that was, I think, pretty spot on, and that was really the only one. The other 2 were sort of technical issues.
Yes, but one of the justices just did look at 8 USC 28 or 2383 and said, "Hey, Congress has already done this. Here it is.
Right.
This is what has to happen. You haven't done that. The federal government hasn't done it, so we can't do this." And I guess the question now is, does the Supreme Court overturn this 7-2 or 9-0?
Yeah, that's my question. I mean, it should be 9-0, but you never know what a couple of those knuckleheads will do. I don't see any of the conservative to mildly conservative justices siding with either Colorado, and certainly not me. So I don't see this as being successful. um, if there are dissents at the Supreme Court level, I'm going to be really interested in what they are. I'm sure I and many others are going to parse the hell out of those dissents because it gives some real insight into how these justices think. Or, well,
Well,
sometimes they have already reached a conclusion, they back into it.
yeah,
So,
let me say, it will give us an insight into how some of these justices use whatever legal reasoning can to
yeah.
justify the results they desire. I, which I guess is a way of showing how the justices think.
At least like Ginsburg could put together a credible argument to support, you know, what she already supported in the first place. But she could lay out a coherent and credible argument. Um, I don't see Jackson being able to do that, and I know Sotomayor Mayor cannot do that. So,
By the way, what does it tell us about the confidence with which the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that as part of their ruling they stayed their own decision?
yeah, I mean, I think they know they're going to get shot down, and so in order to minimize the harm that they could potentially cause, they're staying it. Um, I agree that it does not show a lot of confidence at all, if any.
Because they've explicitly said, sure, here's our decision, but, we're not going to do anything. And by the way, you have to keep Trump's name on the ballot.
Right.
So at the
They
same
just they just wanted to shoot off about it, and they wanted to, make their claims, stake out their position on the Hill.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
that's the sense. Yeah, that's the sense that I get. Right, we're going to make this, principled for some, meanings of the word principled. We're going to make our principled statement. We don't have enough confidence in it to actually tell the Secretary of State to do anything. In fact, we're going to tell him the exact opposite of what we just ruled. We're going to tell the Secretary of State, don't do anything. Don't screw with this at all. Don't screw with it until January 6th unless somebody appeals it. If anybody appeals it, don't screw with it at all. You have to put his name on the ballot.
Right.
He's disqualified. He shouldn't be on the ballot. You can certainly take him off the ballot. He should be taken off the ballot. But whatever you do, don't take him off the ballot.
Yeah. Not now.
So,
Yeah.
It's a weird decision all around.
Well, yeah, that's what non-legal thinking and uh, backing into your reasoning is going to do. It's always sloppy. I mean, Roe v. Wade was the same. It didn't make any sense. And everybody knew it didn't make any sense, but it
Yeah,
achieved an outcome that people wanted.
but look, Roe v. Wade came out of the Warren/Rehnquist era, and especially during the Warren era, where we were so concerned with the, penumbras and
Oh
emanations
God.
uh,
Yeah.
of the U.S. Constitution. And of course, penumbras and emanations come directly from the Warren era. But I mean, the same justices were there in the Rehnquist era, at least at the beginning of it. There was this, and I'm not even sure I disagree with the proposition that there are auras and penumbras or emanations that require certain constitutional results. I don't think it was the results that we got in some cases, but okay, sure, but that's not legal reasoning. You have to kind of lay out precisely how the text of, section whatever requires the result that you are considering to be the aura or the emanation or the penumbra of the constitutional requirement.
Right. Well, and that's what Justice Thomas was railing against in the was it the abortion case? No, it was the second. It was the Second Amendment case, right? He had the lead opinion on the Second Amendment case, I think. On Bruin, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And he was railing against um, what's called substantive due process, which is not due process that's actually written anywhere. It's emanating from the penumbras, and it's a very loose theory that essentially amounts to
It doesn't feel
um,
due processy enough.
right. It essentially amounts to I can basically come up with any reason that I might be affected differently, and therefore it's a violation of substantive due process if that happens.
Well,
And that doesn't really make much sense.
it's very similar to the court's prohibition on pornography.
Yeah, yeah.
Was it Justice Stewart or
It was
Justice
Potter Stewart.
yeah,
Yeah,
Justice Stewart, who said, "Well, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it."
I know it when I see it.
Well, um, while I will defer to Justice Stewart's extensive experience with pornography and its identification, that's not very helpful from a legal point of view.
No.
Substantive
And
due
that's why they
process
started
isn't
inventing these
helpful.
stupid tests. Well, that's why they started inventing these stupid tests. Well, if you pass this part, then you can go to this part. And then if you pass that part, then you can go to these three subparts. And it's like, oh,
Well, the whole test thing. I mean, that is perfectly characterized in Roe, right?
mm-hmm.
Okay, well, here's the thing. If it's in the first trimester, and
Right.
and then the state's interest increases in the second trimester. Wait a second. This is not a constitutional principle. This is a legislative scheme.
Yes. That's what people, especially I, hate about these stupid tests that they come up with, which may be good for one case, but that doesn't mean that that particular test is going to work every single time. Um, it's and it just it is legislating from the bench. You're literally creating new rules that and new hoops for everybody to jump through that Congress didn't create. They apparently forgot when they were writing the statute that you're complaining about.
Yes.
So
Well, the other problem is that
it
Congress doesn't write the statutes correctly.
well, that's true, and they do defer way too much to the administrative state.
Yeah,
But
I mean, look,
that's
I do understand it from the judicial perspective. Congress says, okay, the law is X. How do we
right,
define X? I don't know. The Secretary of Commerce or Defense or the Interior or Justice will figure all that out. We just
right,
know that X is bad. And from the court, and by the court I mean practically any court at any level, there is not enough textual guidance to make decisions a lot of times. I mean, sure, you can look at the CFR and see what the federal regulations are about the issue, since they largely have the force of law. But there are a lot of gray areas in there. I understand the temptation of setting up these tests in an environment where Congress refuses to legislate.
yeah, that's true. Although, um, I mean, the Code of Regulations has definition sections when they go do these things. So maybe that one particular word isn't defined, but it is understandable that some judges may want to create the test just to make it easier for litigants and for the law to be understood by schmo. But that's literally not what happens typically with these tests. They are simply setting it up for future litigation that, hey, you got to meet all these rules before you can succeed at bar. And I, it's it's just legislation. I really don't know how else to look at it.
Yeah, well, when Congress doesn't, and by the way, having been a military policeman, looking at it from that point of view, um, you have to be able to know what to do when you're driving around in your patrol car on the street and you come up against situation X. What is it that I can and can't do?
Yeah,
Right?
that's right.
You know,
And if that's not clearly explained,
yeah. At what point does my traffic stop now begin to edge over into
A detainment or
yeah, false arrest.
yeah, right.
And you know, did I get the appropriate permission to search the vehicle? What's my dividing line between I looked in the window and saw X, and I opened up the back door and looked in and saw X? At what point did that go from plain sight to a search?
Right.
Obviously, opening up the back door begins to constitute a search. Just in case you wondered whether I knew that or not, I did. Once you open up that back door, if you see something that you had not seen previously, guess what? It wasn't in plain sight. It may be
right.
It may be now, but hey, things are in plain sight whenever you open a drawer and pull the socks aside.
Yes. Now look, it's in plain sight.
Look, cocaine in plain sight.
Oh, the word murder weapon right there.
So
under the mattress. Well, I flipped the mattress first.
At which point it was in plain sight. Everything is in plain sight at some point, my friend. The Supreme Court obviously is going to overturn this. Now, the last question about this, and I think we'll probably have to move on, which is this case in Maine. Now, this is not a judicial proceeding. This is just the Secretary of State in Maine saying, yeah, Trump's a bad guy. He shouldn't be on the ballot.
Right. Yeah, and she has no judicial power at all. She's not even a lawyer.
Yeah, so
I mean, you don't have to be a lawyer to be a judge typically, but
yeah, but she's not a judge. She's the Secretary of State.
Correct.
She's an elected official.
Yeah, she decides on mundane matters of, whatever regulations are involved with the election code, and that's really all she has to do.
Right. So I guess my question is, if the Supreme Court overturns the Colorado ruling, does that also have the knock-on effect of saying the Maine ruling has to be changed?
Yeah, it should, because it depends on how the ruling from the Supreme Court is written. And if, as we suspect, the issue of there having never been a trial under 2383, never even an indictment under that statute, that you can't just find on a whim or through some other process that it was violated. You have to go through the federal courts. That's the only place that has jurisdiction to decide the issue. So the Secretary of State has no jurisdiction here whatsoever. Not only is she a part of the state, she's not even a part of the judicial part of the state. She's part of the executive branch. So she doesn't get to make those decisions unilaterally.
Yeah, and by the way, Trump was impeached, but not convicted. So
that's correct.
So the Colorado says, well, he's been impeached, and indeed, I think the Maine Secretary of State indicated he'd been impeached for insurrection-y stuff.
Oh, and I love that the Maine Secretary of State largely relied upon the Colorado ruling, the Colorado Supreme Court ruling, in making her decision.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like they did a pretty darn good job of pulling all this stuff together. I just looked right here and boom, insurrection.
Yep, insurrection in the ruling that they stayed. Sure. Yeah. But again, he was impeached for, as I said, insurrection-y stuff. But you know what didn't happen? He wasn't convicted. So what we're really saying is there is an allegation that Trump did something, and this allegation is so bad that we just have to treat it as if it were proven. And that is what I think is extraordinarily dangerous.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, that's the machine running itself. And yeah, that's not good.
And look, Trump always says, look, if they can do it to me, they'll do it to you.
Oh, and they will. And they do. Which,
however self-serving you might think that is as a statement from Trump, it is in fact true.
Yeah. Look what they're doing to they're charging his maintenance workers, and they went after his lawyers. They went after anybody who did anything with him to scare the bejesus out of anybody associating themselves with Trump.
As of yesterday, the Department of Justice has also decided that not only are we going to go after the people who entered the Capitol on January 6th, we can now go after people who were outside on January 6th. So people who never entered the Capitol, never even crossed a barrier. If you were on the mall that day, we might go after you. I honestly don't know what for.
I don't either.
But apparently that's open season. It's interesting in that I was watching a interview that Tucker Carlson did on Twitter with which is not even
Twixter?
Twitter anymore, X. An interview that Tucker Carlson did on X with Brett Weinstein.
Yeah.
And Brett Weinstein said, look, I think what is happening is that you have a group of people, an elite, who have decided that regular people don't get a say anymore.
Right.
And look, we can say this is all some weird, crazy conspiracy theory that these elites are trying to prevent regular people from saying what they want to say or voting for who they want to vote for, except that it's actually happening. And not only is it actually happening, it happened before in this country in the early part of the 20th century. Woodrow Wilson was not a fella who believed much in the people's right to control things.
It's an understatement, yeah.
Indeed, the entire progressive movement of the early 20th century was based on the idea that there is a class of the anointed, the elect,
right,
the chosen, who should have basically untrammeled ability to tell us how to live our lives because they are the pros from Dover and we're just a bunch of uneducated rubes and hayseeds who can't be trusted to run our own lives.
It's like when Bill Clinton said, hey, I'd love to give you back your money, but we're not sure you'd spend it the right way.
Exactly. Exactly. And that strain has never gone away. I think it is undeniable. And look, we can look back at the Twitter files that, Michael Schellenberg and Matt Taibbi published, and Barry Weiss, whenever Elon Musk opened up the Twitter files. I mean, the federal government was literally picking American citizens saying, hey, these people are saying stuff, they're spreading misinformation. We're telling you it's misinformation. You should do something about it. It's a violation of your terms of service. And of course, they were doing this in an entirely open and transparent and above board way that no one could ever assume any federal coercion was being applied.
Heaven forfend.
Heaven forfend. And these people were silenced by Twitter. Presumably it happened at Facebook. I mean, I don't use Facebook and haven't used Facebook for years, but I assume that were I to go to Facebook, because I do know people who still use it, and if I were to try to post something, Trumpy enough, it would just get censored. I would never be allowed to say it.
Yeah, probably.
It would just be tossed out because they have everything that they consider, misinformation or disinformation. And by the way, not Twitter, but Facebook seems to have been eager to collaborate with the federal government in censoring what Americans were allowed to say on their platforms. And we can go back to these are private platforms and they can do what they want to do. And hey, just build your own Twitter.
Right.
Sure, fine. All of that is.
How about we'll just buy that one?
we could just buy that one. And it's been interesting that after buying Twitter, Elon Musk has basically fired 80% of its personnel, according to his own reckoning, and still seems to work fine. Which raises the question.
As far as I can tell.
And as Elon Musk himself said, hey, whenever you're not trying to run some sort of activist organization, you don't need 80% of those people.
Yeah.
Because they don't actually.
Yeah, that's true.
They don't actually do anything to help the product. They're involved in activism of one kind or another. And We have, we talk about this stuff, or we're treated as if we're talking about a conspiracy theory when we talk about the Great Reset or the UN's, what is it, Agenda 33 or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Can't remember off the top of my head. Or when we talk about the WEF and Klaus Schwab.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's some sort of weird Illuminati thing that it's not really happening, but crazies believe it is.
Except no, it's happening.
Except that they say it.
Yeah, they're not shy about it. I mean, they're quite out in the open with it.
I mean, you can read their books. You can see the statements that they make at the WEF every year.
Mm-hmm.
They're telling you they want a society where you own nothing and will be happy. We'll create your 15-minute walkable cities, and you won't be able to have a car. You'll have your prole box to live in that you can rent from the state, and you'll watch the state's TV. We've already
and you'll live in a shopping mall.
We spent the entire 20th century fighting against that sort of societal organization because it doesn't work. It can't work without coercion. And say you're a conspiracy theory and a crazy, Illuminati believer for whatever, because you say that Klaus Schwab wants to run the Great Reset. It's not a conspiracy theory when they're telling you what they want to do, when they're publicly stating.
And they've got the means to do it.
Yeah, and they're publicly stating you can't be trusted to run your own life. I, on the other hand, being rich, must therefore be infinitely smarter than you are, so I should run your life. Well, we already spent the entire 20th century running against a totalitarian system, and by the way, any state that says they can run your life better than you can must, almost by definition, become a totalitarian system.
Yes, because there's no way to do that without force.
Yeah, there's no way to do that by consent. And the only way that you can do that is if you can manufacture consent by changing society enough that people will accept it. And for those who do not wish to accept it, who don't want to sign on to the weird, crazy social contract that you have constructed and forced on everybody, well, there's an easy way to get rid of them.
Throw them in the gulag. There's really no opt-out button.
Gulag seems so expensive. 9 grams of lead fixes everything.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you're a totalitarian, it's a lot easier to just cast 9 grams of lead into a bullet than it is to build gulags. Or,
yes, that's true.
Mental hospitals.
Right.
In fact, I think the best thing that you can say about the Soviet Union or the communist Chinese is that they didn't kill as many people as they could have.
True.
Can't say that about the Cambodians. The Cambodians took that seriously.
Yes, Pol Pot was very efficient and quick.
Yeah, when Pol Pot made that economic calculation of bullets or gulags, bullets are cheaper, and he killed a quarter of the population of Cambodia. At least
and the Chinese were giving him the bullets. So
yeah, the Chinese were giving him the bullets. The economic calculation was rational for him. We have, and look, Brett Weinstein is right about this. We have an elite who wants to control everything, and they don't particularly think that democracy is a good way forward. And I know that elite exists because that elite has existed for a century.
Oh, yeah.
Woodrow Wilson, for those of you who don't remember, when he decided that it was no longer convenient to keep America out of the war and that we needed to enter World War I, ensured that nobody would point out that this was a complete 180-degree reversal of policy on Wilson's part, because anyone who did all of a sudden became guilty of sedition.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a number of people who opposed Wilson and who opposed America's entry into World War I who found themselves in federal prison. And it took years for the federal court system to go back, overturn the convictions, and indeed...
I don't think that was constitutional, guys.
Yeah, and indeed overturn the act.
Alien and Sedition Act.
Yeah, the Alien and Sedition Act. So we know that they exist because we can look back 100 years, 110 years. Well, no, World War I, 1917, 106 years, and we can look back and see a government that actually decided that. And look, frankly, if the man hadn't had a stroke, I'm not entirely sure that he would not have run for president again in 1920.
I'm sure he would have. Yes.
I
Well,
mean,
you look, we don't even need to go that far back. Just look at how the Democratic Party is run right now. They have delegates,
and
but
super delegates.
then they have the super delegates. And nobody gets to choose the super delegates except for the party power system.
Because you can't let the rubes and hayseeds pick the delegates that will actually make the choice. And by the way,
Which Bernie found out when he won
yeah,
the state, but somehow didn't get any of the delegates.
yeah, exactly. Because Hillary Clinton had the super delegates locked up. Because once the rubes and hayseeds start making decisions, you lose control.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that frightens me about 2024, one of the things that frightens me about this election, is that we are heading towards an election that will decide, I think, whether the rubes and hayseeds get a say in what happens in their own country.
Yeah. Whether or not we have another election, whether or not we have a country. I think a lot of things are going to be decided by this and how it's run. In the end, I almost don't know if it matters who wins. At least if it's Trump and Biden. I still don't think Biden's going to make it, but if it's Trump and Biden, I mean, I'm not sure that anybody's going to be terribly satisfied with the outcome. And
Well, look,
whichever side loses is going to go nuts.
Look, before we left on our holiday hiatus, we actually looked. 3/4 of the electorate don't want either Joe Biden or Donald Trump running for president.
Right.
So, as far as I can tell, we are being given a choice in this election to pick a candidate, whoever it might be, that we don't want to have as president.
And yet somehow the voters are putting these people over the top. I mean, to the extent that the Democrats are even having a primary.
Oh,
which
yeah.
they don't.
Yeah, 4 states now have just decided that I think it's Florida, North Carolina, can't remember the other 2. I'd have to go and relook that up. But anyway, 4 states have already just said, yeah, Joe Biden's going to be the only Democrat on the primary ballot.
Yep.
Nobody else. No JK or RFK Jr. Certainly no Bernie Sanders.
Right.
It's Joe Biden or nobody.
I mean, that's how they're going to operate it. But then, the Republicans aren't any better. I mean, Trump is super popular amongst the Republicans.
Yeah, but at least
I don't know why when you've got such viable choices.
I look, there is, I think, there's a couple of things going on with Trump. And, what time is it? It is 6:08. We've been at this an hour and 8 minutes. We don't have a lot.
I don't know. Let me check my handy watch.
Your Orient Bambino, yes.
And let's see.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Michael and I spent a couple of hours on the phone being over watches, and he saw the Orient Bambino and fell in love with it. I'm, on the other hand, because I am a commie supporter, am happy with my Vostok Komandirsky 24-hour watch. There is more than a whiff of cult of personality around Trump.
Yeah.
So he has a core of, I'm not even sure they're Republican voters now at this point.
That's a good point, actually, that there are people who will only vote for Trump. They won't vote for anybody else. They won't even vote in any other election. They will only vote for Trump.
Yeah. Like I said, there is a cult of personality vibe around Trump. Don't know how big that is. And we'll only know probably starting in Iowa when we see the caucuses and we get at least some early indication of what Trump's support is. But prior to, and by the way, Iowa caucuses are only a couple of weeks out now.
Yeah, that's true. Holy
But
crap.
but at least that's people who want to vote for Trump. Right? I mean, he has that level of support in the primary. Now, then there are the people who will transactionally support Trump, the people who dislike him, the Kurt Schlichters of the world. I don't like Donald Trump. I think he's a bit of an asshole. But if it's Trump versus Biden, I'm voting for Trump.
Right.
So but of course, that only kicks in the general. How they're going to vote in the primary, we don't know. And how many there are who really would say, yeah, I would vote for Trump if I absolutely had to, but I hope I don't have to, who are going to vote for somebody else. And then you just have the people who used to be Republicans, but who've decided they will never vote, never support Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I understand all three groups of people. Well, actually,
yeah.
There's one group I don't understand, and that is the only Trump people.
They're the hardest. I don't know. I kind of get where they're coming from. They don't think that politicians are there for them because they've got a lot of experience to show that politicians are not exactly there for them. And I think they like that Trump's an outsider. He's a businessman and he runs it like a business. I don't think they give a flying fig about all the controversy that surrounds him wherever he goes. I don't think they really care about the whining. I think they actually quite enjoy that, as a matter of fact. And I think they want a wholesale change of what goes on in Washington. And on those points, I can absolutely agree. Their insistence seems that only Trump can do it.
Yeah,
Nobody else, only Trump.
That has a whiff of George B. McClellan's 1864 campaign. I know that I can save this country and that I alone can.
Yeah. It's a bit of a messiah complex going on.
Yeah, that bothers me. And it's not even that I'm saying that Trump has a messiah complex. I mean, he may very well have one. He's a fairly egotistical fella. It's that other people, some of his supporters have a messiah complex with the guy. And
yeah, exactly.
I don't trust any politician. And in fact, it's a highly unusual politician that can rarely move me past mild contempt in terms of positivity. So I don't get the Donald Trump can save us. He's the only guy that can save us, especially when they make arguments that are so, okay, like COVID is a great example. And it's really weird when you see people like Alex Bruesewitz and Laura Loomer, who have gone from DeSantis is great to DeSantis is awful. DeSantis killed people via COVID because he wouldn't lock down. When you have voters who, I mean, Donald Trump, whenever he's doing public meetings, has stopped calling himself the father of the vaccine.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
Okay, he knows that doesn't fly. And he is the guy that gave Fauci a commendation on his way out of the Oval Office. He's the guy that did what Fauci wanted to do. And whatever you may think about the vaccine, he's the guy that approved Operation Warp Speed that got us the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
And people who would normally, and who I see like in places like Twitter, who normally have opinion A about COVID or opinion A about one of any number of subjects where they are in opposition to Donald Trump. Whenever Donald Trump comes out and says something that opposes what they've just said, they will clap like trained seals.
Yeah, well, because they're not doing any actual thinking. They're just following. And the thing is that, a long time ago, a mentor of mine told me that, people will get on a train going somewhere. So if you drive that train somewhere, they will follow you. And that's kind of what Trump has. He's got this train of misfits and ne'er do wells who have come out of the woodwork for him, and they see him driving a train to where they want to go. Okay, I encourage them to expand their horizons a little bit and see that there might be some other qualifications that would be helpful.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
they
but
don't. And
some of the arguments are so weird. Like, DeSantis would have been great if he would have just been loyal to Trump and waited till
yeah, that I don't
2028.
get.
I
The
don't
whole
know
loyalty thing, that's
who
cult of
who owes
personality.
politicians loyalty.
Yeah,
Politicians are begging us for a job, and we get to tell them to fuck off.
yeah,
I don't owe loyalty to any politician. My support for politicians is entirely transactional. The only question I have for any politician is, what are you going to do for me
right.
within
And
the
can you
bounds
do it?
within the bounds of the law and the Constitution? What are you going to do for me?
Right.
I don't owe you anything. And if you do something I don't like, I reserve the right to, metaphorically, stab you in the back at the first opportunity. Because
That's right.
this is not that's the thing. It's not a religion, and many of us are acting like it is.
Well, and that's been going on for a while, as but more in the realm of Team A and Team B. Yay, 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 my team. The other team is horrible and they suck eggs. And just doesn't matter what the issues are. It just matters that my team's right, your team's wrong. So there's no substance to any of this. And typically, there's not much substance to any of the campaigns. It's rare, unless it's a local, office, that you hear anything that is actually issue oriented.
That is such a great point. If you were to go back, look, just watch the televised debate between Kennedy and Nixon.
Yeah.
Whatever else you might want to talk about in terms of personality and Nixon not taking his makeup and looking a little pale and whatever, throw all that aside. Just listen to what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to what they're talking about. I mean, they're having a technical discussion about nuclear deterrence vice the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
They're talking
Had that
about
in 1980 too.
Yeah, they're talking about important things. And that's, and we talk sort of around important things. I mean, the whole Democratic thing now is we can't let an insurrection. We have to protect democracy.
Still don't know what that means.
Okay, yeah, but yeah, that's the problem. It sounds good. It sounds like an important issue. We have to protect democracy. All right, how? By refusing to allow some people to vote for their preferred candidate?
That sounds like subverting democracy.
Because you're afraid that if he gets elected, he'll somehow be anti-democratic and he won't leave office? Then why did he leave office on January 20th, 2021? Yeah. But we're here to save democracy. And Donald Trump is, we have to drain the swamp. Yeah, there is a swamp. It has to be drained. Why didn't you do it your first 4 years?
Mm-hmm.
Is it because you didn't know and now you do know, and in the 4 years that you now have left, you have some plan to drain the swamp? What is that plan? What are the steps that you will take?
I would love to hear that plan, actually.
I mean, I want to protect democracy. What's your plan to protect democracy? You don't need to know that. You just need to know that democracy is super important and I care. And look, Donald Trump, same thing. We have to drain the swamp. How? Well, it's a swamp. There must be drainage. Okay, great. It doesn't give me any sort of rational policy prescription that I could either support or oppose. Because everything has now become emotional. Look, as much of a jerk as he was, and as much of an avatar of modern society as he was, at least Bill Clinton had the sense to, in both of his campaigns, to talk about actual policies.
Yeah.
The national debt,
Ones that he could actually implement.
the deficit, balancing the budget, the middle class tax cut that he couldn't give us because we wouldn't spend it properly. All of the other things that something happened sometime around 2008 where we just stopped talking about the policies and everything began to move towards emotional arguments.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd say even earlier than that. I mean, 2004 was all about who's actually really a patriot.
You know what? You're right. Because after 9/11, the entire national conversation got hijacked by George W. Bush into the "Are you for us or against us?"
Right.
And 2004, basically the election in 2004, well, there's me who loves America and who, and then there's the Vietnam traitor,
Right. The medal tossing Vietnam traitor.
the medal tossing traitor who hates this country. And yeah, I think you're right. I think 2000 was the last election where we had.
At least in that election, Gore and Bush both spoke about things like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. You know, how the hell are we going to support this? You know,
Well,
we've got to figure out some way for it to be solvent.
it needed to be put into a lockbox, as Al Gore told us. Yeah, we just don't talk about that anymore. So it's really, we do talk about plagiarism. We've just spent 2 weeks
Right.
talking about Claudine Gay at Harvard and her plagiarism. And
Not placing quotes where they should have been.
yeah, well, here's the thing. First of all, Claudine Gay has been at Harvard something like 17 years or something like that. And
Yeah, I don't know if that's in. Well, she was also at Stanford, I think, but
yeah, look, she's published 11 papers.
that's just as scholarly papers. That's unbelievable. I mean,
there are physicists.
can't-
There are physicists at Harvard who publish a paper every 2 months.
Yeah. I mean, that with that kind of scholarship background, I don't know how she can stay tenured. I mean, typically there's a requirement that
Yes,
professors actually produce scholarship.
at research
That's
institutes.
why they have TAs
yes.
and stuff.
Yes, typically, but
Right.
that does not hold true for the atypical candidates. So so basically 11 papers and something like 17 allegations of plagiarism spread out between them, or 25.
Yeah, on like half of the papers.
Yeah. So, okay, should you be president of Harvard? Probably not. First of all, if you've been in this for 20, 25 years and you have 11 papers, nobody should even consider you for president of Harvard. I don't even know how you have tenure unless you wrote 17 papers until you got tenure and then you stopped and now they can't get rid of you. Okay, that I can see.
And how is she getting paid $1 million a year?
$900,000 a year.
Jesus.
Which is good work if you can get it. But Bill Ackman, the billionaire investor who, along with Christopher Rufo, was one of the people who helped to drive Claudine Gay out of the presidency of Harvard. Well, his wife was, for 15 years, a tenured professor at MIT. And so after Claudine Gay got ousted, Business Insider started looking at Bill Ackman's wife and looked over her academic publications, of which she has many, many more than Claudine Gay. I think 72 papers in 15 years, which is pretty good output, by the way. So in her doctoral dissertation, which was 330 pages long, they found 4 paragraphs which were cited and footnoted, but which did not have quotation marks. And of course, now we're playing the gotcha game. That's a violation of MIT's plagiarism plagiarism
Okay, she
policy.
can't be president then either.
Yeah, and she's not there anymore. So, okay, she'll never get to be president of MIT.
Oh well, you win.
Like so many other arguments, this has just descended into stupidity.
Mm-hmm.
Look, Claudine Gay.
It's Twitter tit for tat.
Claudine Gay was citing academic papers without quotations, without citations, or any other form of attribution. She was literally just plagiarizing language without attribution.
Yeah.
Bill Ackman's wife clearly made some mistakes. There was one paper where there's a couple of papers where she doesn't have quotation marks, although she has both inline and footnoted citations. Are we talking about plagiarism or are we talking about editing errors?
Right.
And if our policies on plagiarism are so tightly wrapped around about, well, in your 330 pages, you didn't put quotation marks around 4 paragraphs. Doesn't matter that you cited the author in their paper. I think there's another allegation where she cited an author, but she appears to have cited a different paper by the author than the one that she should have.
Yeah, it's a Scribner's error.
Yeah. What are we arguing about here? Sure, the policies exist, and the policies are tough, and they're very tough for undergraduates. You can get expelled for doing stuff like that. But look, if I'm writing a 330-page dissertation, is the problem that I'm a cheat, or is the problem that it's hard to edit a 330-page paper with perhaps 700 citations?
Right.
How do we make that discrimination? And of course, ever since that Business Insider article came out, Bill Ackman has decided to take a shall we call it, more nuanced look at
is scorched earth nuanced?
At plagiarism. So now he says, okay, fine, let's just go through everybody at MIT and run papers through AI plagiarism checks. Okay, I'm perfectly willing to do that. Let's do that. What are we going to find? We're going to find a lot of plagiarism. Because I think
a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of laziness in academia. There is horrific pressure to publish. And so you publish, and some things are going to fall through the cracks. And besides, people aren't perfect. They're not robots. You're going to miscite something, and you're going to leave off quotation marks. I mean, that stuff is going to happen. What are we getting ourselves into here with this talk about plagiarism? I think there's a big difference between plagiarizing someone's ideas, which, by the way, also happens all the time. If you're a research professor and you have a post-doc or a grad student who are working from you, I guarantee you that there are research professors who are stealing their postdocs or their graduate students' idea.
Yes, most certainly.
Guarantee it. And so,
I mean, Tesla had the same complaint again against Edison. So,
yeah. So I just don't understand how. Maybe we need to take a different look at plagiarism and how it works. There's no reason for it to be this contentious. Although the opposite side is, how much of this plagiarism is actually going on? How much laziness has actually infiltrated into academia where plagiarism can be so easily found?
Well, there's also the problem that the substance of all these writings and papers and whatever isn't nearly up to snuff anymore. They have been doing this for the past few years, where they've taken these studies and tried to replicate them, and something like 80% or more are just non-replicable.
Yeah, didn't they just get rid of the president of I forget who it was. He has a French name, and I can't think of it. I can't think of the university. I keep wanting to say MIT. I'm not sure it was MIT, but maybe it was Stanford.
I don't recall.
But I mean, they started looking over his research, and basically he's just cooking the books.
Yeah. And that's happened a bunch. That happened with all the client scientist stuff. We all remember, East Anglia University and how nobody could ever reproduce the results. Well, the data's corrupted. Well, then how did you use it? Yeah. And it's all in an effort to hide the ball. I fear that most academic research and study uh, these days is either useless or hopelessly tied up with some activism that you can't really tell, what's worthwhile in there and what isn't.
Yeah,
And
it's
if that's who you're stealing your ideas from, well,
look, if you are under, and by the way, this is something that's relatively new, this idea that you have to publish all the time, and that tenure decisions are based on your publications, and your ability to move from one university to another, largely based on your research publications.
mhm,
We have set up a system where we are using your publications as a proxy for the quality of your mind, the quality of your
mhm,
thinking, presumably the quality of your teaching as well, although we clearly care less about that than we used to, since basically adjuncts are teaching 70% of all college courses. Um, that's the proxy. And since that's the proxy, why does it surprise us that the way to get around that as the proxy for all of these career decisions, which might be financially very lucrative if they go your way, why are we surprised that a system has sprung up that allows you to publish, well, like those guys who did in the social science stuff? They just published gobbledygook, and it got accepted
mhm.
in publications. And then, of course, they got fired for, for academic fraud because those studies never actually occurred. Yeah, the fraud isn't that the studies never occurred. The fraud is that they passed peer review and got published. That's the
Yeah.
entire point. If you're going to
One of
build,
them was about what was it, toxic masculinity at the dog park or something.
yeah, exactly. Um,
There was some that should have just been on first glance.
yeah, people are going to respond to the incentives you create. And we've created
Yeah.
an incentive in academic life to publish a lot, which has in turn created an industry that enables you to publish a lot.
Hmm.
And by the way,
And it doesn't have to be anything good. It just has to be gobbledygook
yeah,
that,
and by
you
the
know,
way, we know that teaching at the university has fallen by the wayside.
hmm
I mean, employers now are starting to even back off from the demands that you have a college degree because we're actually able to look and see that the average college graduate has an IQ of 100.
hmm
Vice 50 years ago when the average IQ of a college graduate was 130. Okay, we now know that college is no better than high school, and the people who graduated from college are basically just average people. There's no,
Yeah, they're just older teenagers.
yeah, there's no cachet that comes from college. And what we have done is we've moved from anybody who graduates from college must be smart, we got to hire them and they'll do better throughout their lives, to college has basically replaced high school, but we still have Yale and Harvard and Stanford and Princeton and Penn to, but even those schools, John Fetterman came back last week or this last week and said something to the effect of, "Look, when I went to Harvard, it was already pretty pinko. I don't even recognize the place now."
He went to Harvard.
Yeah, he said it was always pretty pinko, but I don't even recognize the place anymore.
He's just the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, he is. So we talk about having the best universities in the world, and I have gone from that being a point of pride to a point of fearing that that might be true.
Yeah, exactly. But I do fear that that's true.
Because if we have
I
the
mean,
best universities in the world, what kind of intellectual ghettos have they created in, Great Britain or France or wherever else?
well, what's even more worrisome is they aren't creating those kind of ghettos in places like China. where they're actually teaching real math, real competition. They're teaching real engineering, real physics, real literature. I mean, they're not doing these things that the woke do. That they're actually they want people to be successful. They're really happy that everybody else is getting dumbed down. That makes it easier for them to climb into the driver's seat.
Yeah, well, of course, China has its own problems in terms of demographics, a shrinking and aging population, and within the next couple of years having more retirees than they have actual workers. Their time window is closing, but at least on the educational side, they are playing it smart. However, that is something obviously that we'll have to talk about in the future, because we are out of time for tonight. So glad you're back, Michael. I'm glad to be back.
You too.
And I will.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
I'll look forward to talking to you again next time.
All right. Bye, y'all.
You've been listening to the Observations Podcast for, I have to switch it to only me now. Hi, how are you? You've been listening to the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 7th of January, 2024. I even got the year right. Thanks for listening to us. Hope you'll be listening to us again next time. Until then, have a great week. So long.